Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us for Table Talk from wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is. Uh, Table Talk is a series of conversations about food, but it's not a recipe show. We're not going to show you how to cook something or cook on camera, or recipes may come up in the conversation, but they're not the focus. The focus here is just because is that food is focus is actually the wrong word to use for table talk, because there's never a tight focus on anything. We talk about things that are adjacent to food, and practically everything is adjacent to food. And we chat the way we talk if we were in one another's houses, having had a nice meal and sitting down with a cup of coffee or a drink and chatting and getting to know one another better, perhaps. Or, so it's like an adda, but with an audience. And you're welcome to join the adda later. But my guest today is Vidya Balachander, whose writing I first encountered somewhere last year when I read a lovely piece that she had written on asafoetida, which had so much history and culture and everything. And this is something that I barely thought about before that. And suddenly I knew so much about one spice. And I followed her work since. Vidya, glad to have you with us. So happy you were able to make the time, and especially since you've not been well this last week, but you've still made the time. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Peter. It's my pleasure entirely. I'm always surprised when people show up to hear what I have to say, because I think that I'm very much on the learning, like I'm still learning so much, and I'm always surprised. But I'm also really happy to share, whatever little I know, and to learn from others as well. So thank you for having me.
Well, I'm looking through the people who are here now, and there are many people who are here for the first time. So those are clearly people who have come here because of you, right? So
my dad is among the attendees. He has never attended any live event that I've ever done before. So yeah.
That would be V. Balachander?
Yes, that is V. Balachander. My husband's here as well. So yeah, I mean, I have a little cheering party.
Yeah. So great. Yes. So we will get down to what we thought we'd talk about as our focus, which was, the way food migrates and all that. But first, let's talk about how Vidya migrated, and what are your formative memories of food and cooking? Where did your interest start? What were your earliest memories of the kitchens of your childhood?
Well, I think it's important to mention that movement has been a part of my life since I was really young. My dad was a banker with the State Bank of India, which meant that we moved every few years. But my very, very first and most formative memories of a kitchen as a kitchen space, and also of the people who cooked in it, are actually of my maternal grandparents' home, which was in Ratlam, which is a small town that is only actually known for being in that movie Jab We Met, but otherwise just a small, like really nondescript junction in Madhya Pradesh. My grandparents retired there, and I have really vivid memories, and I grew up with them for about 4 or 5 years. And I remember, there was a large kind of kitchen, or maybe it felt large because I was a kid. Either way, it was one of those, it was a kitchen which was constantly bustling with people and food, because my grandparents and my grand uncles and aunts lived together in a kind of luxurious senior citizen home of their own making. And because they had worked really hard pretty much all through their lives, they believed in eating really well. So, I think my earliest memories are of kind of sitting around that really large dining table where a lot of people were welcome, eating home food for the most part, but also my grand uncle really loved to kind of spoil me with Ratlami kachoris and samosas, which are all very famous. And it was frowned upon because, it was also like street food, and why would you eat something that is off the street? And so, but I do remember that even as young as 5 or 6, that was really a highlight for me, because I think it was also kind of like forbidden and not really encouraged to eat food from the street, and therefore I would aggressively seek it out. And that has remained a kind of, let's say, it's a thread that runs through my life, because like I aggressively seek out street food wherever I am. But those are my earliest memories of really delicious food, but also I think warmth and kind of being really taken care of as a little girl. And then I moved so many cities since then. I lived in Chennai for very briefly. I lived in Bangalore. I moved to Bombay, and I spent, I think, the largest chunk of my adult life in Bombay. So I have moved, movement has been a part of my life since I was really young. And I think all of those cities have had a bearing on, all of those influences have had a bearing on how I think about food and how I write about food as well.
I think as a child, I bought the propaganda, and I only hit street food in a big way probably in college, because school I was probably a little insufferable, telling people that they shouldn't be eating stuff from the stands and things like that. It was only peer pressure in later days that I started doing things like having maybe a gola here and there, and the sebarada puri and stuff like that, which I discovered a liking for and would splurge my pocket money on when I was on my way to college and stuff like that. But I think it took me some time to get to that stage of being able to sort of enjoy it without too much worry. I still will not have sugarcane juice off the streets.
Wow. Okay.
In my head, that
probably a wise thing though.
Yeah.
Sugarcane juice, probably wise not to. I mean, I have taken risks. Like I had this place in Bombay. My best friend and I, after we finished at Xavier's, we would invariably spend the next several hours kind of just chatting about, it's like the early 20s. You have all these like searching questions that you think are of radical importance, but really don't interest anybody except like you. So we used to go to this place. She used to live in Crawford Market at the time, and we used to go to there used to be a Metro shoe showroom, which I believe it's still Metro. And that kind of cross section of the street has the most lovely street food. There's a sandwich wala who's really good. There's a sugarcane juice wala who's very good, and there's a pani puri wala who's really good. That pani puri just looks dodge, but it had that illicit thrill, like I am eating something that could potentially and very well might get me into trouble, but I must have it. So I've been kind of, so I've lived like, I really don't want to recollect the kind of places I've had pani puri in Bombay. Like some of them so obviously dodge, but you have to do it.
What was the Faluda place that?
Badshah
Faluda was also.
Yeah.
It was rather expensive for me when I was in college days, but occasionally did.
Yeah.
Was the vada pav guy outside Xavier's gate still there when you were in college?
I don't know about vada pav, but there was a sandwich guy.
The sandwich
guy was
Metro
he's still
side,
there.
But on the VT side, there was vada pav stand. I mean, a car.
Yeah.
I hated vada pavs, but I loved their bhajia pav.
Yeah, actually, I'm not a huge vada pav fan either. Like, I've just never been. Yeah, I think it's overrated, honestly. Yeah. Like, as much as I love carb upon carb, like that's my formula for life, but like not vada pav. But the Xavier's, so what used to happen is we used to, be part of the Indian music group and used to organize the Jan Fest. So during that time, it used to be Jan, and the weather was really nice, and it would actually be chilly in the evenings. The commerce, Xavier's commerce section had they didn't have much of a canteen because the canteen would close, but there was a guy who used to come who sold vada pav and samosa pav, and I would always eat that samosa pav. So I think the thing about food, and especially street food, is that so much of it is related to, I guess, where you are in life at that moment, or, or like circumstantially kind of like in whose company you are. And I think that so much of our value judgment about food also is related to how we consume it. And I suppose to that extent, likes and dislikes are so fleeting. And yet we're so kind of parochial and even judgmental about what other people eat, and this is it's an interesting thing that that you'd feel so passionately about what somebody else is eating, to the point that you would potentially dislike that person. I mean, this is like wildly veering off this very, very pleasant conversation about street food, but it was just something that came to me now, that it's a funny thing how we all universally enjoy it, and yet we can wage war over it.
Comfort food is always rooted in time and people, right? People have different comfort foods. I mean, my comfort food is kaswe,
Oh
because
yeah,
part of my family came from
yes.
Burma, right? And my grand made this wonderful kaswe, my grand and my aunt and my mom. And for me, kaswe is home. Kaswe feels lovely, and it's not something I share with a lot of people. I mean, just the stuff we're talking about, I've had, numerous times when my people have threatened to cancel my Bombay card because I don't like vada pav, I don't like bhel puri, I'm not, and I hate pani puri. People have threatened to, sort of evict me completely. No, part of my thing here is I have incredibly low tolerance for chili, and
Yeah, okay.
it makes me sweat. It causes me pain, and it gives me, I can't I don't like chili in the first place, and that dislike also extends to capsicum. That entire family. It's just too noxious. It sort of destroys the flavor of all food for me. Capsicum is not too spicy for me, but it overwhelms other tastes, and chilies are that plus more. So I get, looked down a lot. You look down at me a lot in large parts of India because I am that Indian who can't handle spicy food. So,
Hey, that's fine, I think. I mean, I've met so many people who hate coconut. And for me, that's sort of inconceivable, for the reason that there are so many wonderful ways in which you can actually use coconut in cooking, and it's not just the coconut chutney I mean, that's the most obvious one, or the coconut, I mean, the coconut milk and like the poriyal of South India. All those are the kind of obvious ones, but there are so many other delightful ways in
using
which
coconut oil, people just cannot fathom people using coconut oil to cook.
Fair enough. I mean, and I see it. I mean, I understand why, because it's not to everybody's taste, I imagine. So, hey, if you don't like vada pav, you don't like vada pav.
I keep trying to tell people, look, I don't like vada pav. There's more for you, right?
There's always enough.
Why do you want to convert me to vada pav? Why is it so important for you to make me think highly of vada pav? I'm not condemning it. I just don't. It's not for me. And unfortunately, that does happen a lot where people's, and I think perhaps it's related to what you were talking about, which is our relationships are so with food are so much a part of the relationships we have with, that we form, that are our sense of self. And in a sense, I can see where my not liking vada pav hurts someone because they have a warm attachment to it. So I'm looking at it more seriously than I was a few seconds ago. And so they want to share that. They want you to share in their enjoyment and love for it, and I can't. But it is what it is.
It is what it is, I think. It's interesting because you can belong to a friend circle or even in your family, like, people who have wildly differing tastes. And for me, that makes the experience of it more interesting than if everybody had the same kind of, everybody enjoyed the same thing and everybody liked to eat the same thing. I see the comfort in it. I see the comfort in a worldview where everybody thinks like you, everybody eats like you. I see the draw of it. But equally, I think that what's so fascinating and beautiful about taste, as somebody just mentioned in the chat, is that it's personal, and it's diversity is good, I think.
Several people have mentioned the moment you said Ratlam Save.
Ratlami Save is very famous. I am not hugely nostalgic about it. Maybe I just had too much of it as a kid. But it has this very typically kind of, they add a lot of clove to the gram flour batter, so it has a really strong and lots of chili, so you're definitely not going to like it. But one of the great joys of my life is that much of my maternal family still lives in Indore and in Ratlam. My mom's siblings and my cousins. And Indore has just the most spectacular food. I mean, of all kinds, but just the most spectacular food scene. One of the cities in the country that just has brilliant food. You know, they have the Sarafa street food market which is a jewelry market by day, and it transforms into a street food market by night, and it's on till like 2 in the morning. There's not a, I mean, Indore is not wildly exciting in other ways, but when it comes to food, like, people have this immense dedication. You know, they will stand in the line, they will find the guy, like they will give you the recommendation for the namkeen shop, which is the absolute best. So in a sense, I think that I've had this exposure, you know, and that explains why um food of all kinds is so exciting to me, because like it's very much been part of my growing up experience, I think.
When you were talking about vada pav, I had this flashback. A friend of mine, young woman who joined us in Forbes from America, and she sort of one of the things that she was vegan, and she came to India expecting it would be easy to be vegan in India, and that it was not. But on vada pav, she was like, and she's very health conscious as well. Her decisions on being vegan, she fluctuates. Sometimes she is vegan, sometimes she's not, but mostly she's there. But it's a lot about health and awareness about being a very sensitive, caring person. On the health front, he said, so you take carbs, you smash those carbs, you dip it in more carbs, you deep fry that, and then you put it in another carb and eat that, right? Liz, that's what we do. But if it helps, I don't think. But yeah. What about?
But some of the best food, in my opinion, is carbs upon carbs upon carbs. Okay, so I may be biased, but one of my most favorite foods, especially since I moved to Dubai a couple of years ago, I had first eaten it in London many years ago. It's koshari, the Egyptian street food, which is just, it's literally a formula based on carb upon carb upon carb, because you have rice, you have vermicelli, you have macaroni, you have lentils, you have chickpeas, and you have a little bit of tomato sauce and like fried onions and this kind of garlicky vinegar on top. But it is among the best things I've ever eaten. So I think carb upon carb is a very good formula. I'm just saying this. I don't think, this is just what I think. Apurva mentions here, let's talk about the amount of cheese that goes into Indian street food. When did it get so important? Well, that's a nice question. I honestly think it's a score, like it's a bit of a disease, no? Like, especially the fact that like so much Amul grated cheese goes into literally everything. Everything, like no sense, no logic.
It's like, I've never quite figured out that, because it's not exactly a great cheese in the first place. And so much of it, I mean, and then so many, I remember once there was in the Matunga area where the place I worked once had an office. There's a famous sandwich guy there, and I was like, okay, make me a sandwich. And he said, do you want the cheese one? And I said, okay. And so he makes the sandwich and then picks up that tin cheese ka lump and grates and grates and grates and grates, and like the sandwich is this much and the cheese is that much on top of it, a grated cheese. And I was like, whoa.
Tell me, where did you eat this?
So this was in the Matunga West area. I had an office. My office was, there's an area called Ruby Mills.
Yeah.
So my office was in New Era Mill, and the Network 18 had another office near Ruby Mill in one of the developed area there. And there was that famous set of theaters there, which is slipping my mind right now. This is around there. There's a street side guy. And it was literally, like I said, this much sandwich and that much mountain of grated cheese on top. But yeah, the whole thing of the what Terry Pratchett called, one of his characters, the autocondimenter, the type of person who would take everything on the table and bung it on,
Yeah, no, I agree. I remember one of my most formative food memories is of going to Right Place in Breach Candy. I don't know how many people have gone there, but it's like it's next to one of, it's been there forever, and it's like a little, like, you go inside and it's on the main road. Their sandwich, I'm not kidding, is like 3 stories high, like that big, and it used to cost $50 back in the day, which was a lot of money. But also, like, this cheese phenomenon, the fact that cheese is just like a constant, and there's so much of it that um goes into street food. Geeta here is asking any thoughts on where and how kottu roti, kottu paratha originated.
So I'd like to come back to that in a bit.
Yeah,
But
sure.
for now, I want to ask one thing, which is I want to step back into when we talked about early memories. We talked about your memories of food, but also about cooking and your first experiments there and your first learning. How did that go? Because I feel I like to have this part of the conversation because it sets the ground for what else we talk about.
Sure. So I think I started cooking actually pretty young. Because I think it was just one of those things, I think that kids also, like, I have an older brother. It was something that we used to do together. We used to bond over. So, I was making like rotis and stuff, but for fun, I mean, it was never like, oh, you need to learn this, but it was more like, if you know to make it, great. So I used to make, I remember, payasam and roti and things like that, but like when I was a kid, but more for the fun of it. And then for a long time, I didn't cook at all, because, like, I think it's also when I moved out of home, I was 22 or 23 at the time, and I moved to Bombay. It was just not a priority, I think. It was just also that the kind of thing that you just kind of get by and you eat what you can, and like you're young and you are slightly careless. It was not until I actually moved from, it was actually when I started working with BBC Good Food that it began to dawn on me that I had a slightly imbalanced relationship with food, where, like, I really enjoyed it. I liked eating it. I liked writing about it. I liked to be nerdy about it, but I could not cook. And that was a strange, thing. And I saw that as being an impediment to my enjoy. Like, I felt like my relationship with food was not complete, and I was engaged with it on a professional basis and in every other way. And then, as it turns out, I moved to Sri Lanka in 2014, and suddenly it came home to me that I needed to cook to access the food that I missed, which is as compelling a draw to cooking as anything else, because even though Sri Lanka is so close to India in terms of, like, geographically and culturally to some extent, the palette that I took was not one that I had and that I wanted to satisfy. It was not one that I could easily, find easy answers for. I mean, even I think Indian food in general in Colombo at the time was really hard to come by. It was not a very good quality. And I also I felt bereft in that way that so many migrants feel, like you just feel, I'm close to home, but I'm far away from home. And there is very little that's giving me this comfort that I seek. And therefore, from then on, I realized, like, I think it was a very organic kind of evolution whereby I realized that I needed to cook. And from then on, I think that I cook a lot. Like, now I cook very often. During the pandemic, I think I cooked pretty much every day. And that was also kind of, like I told you earlier, that was also kind of discipline. It was also that I think that so many of us began to think about our relationship with food in a very, very deep way during the pandemic, because I think that we are cut off from all the sources that we normally take for granted. I mean, here in Dubai, I should say, Restaurants and deliveries were never affected, even during the 3-week lockdown that we had. Like, food was still being delivered to your doorstep. But I think fundamentally something changed. So I felt like I think that just the fact that feeding yourself and your family and keeping yourself safe became such an act of self-preservation that I felt the need to kind of cook. And I think the more you cook, the more the more it comes to you, it becomes easy. And yeah, I mean, that's essentially, I'd say, I want to say it's in the last 7 or 8 years that I have started cooking in a way that is much more immediate and with much more passion. I mean, now, of course, I make ice cream and I make various other things. But I think it's two very crucial things. One is that I moved away from home, from India, and I needed to recreate the flavors that were important to me or that reminded me of home and that I was nostalgic for. And the second one was the pandemic and this need to, and I think that cooking as an act of self-preservation, it really came home to me during that time.
Mhm. Which I mean, and I think it did change a lot of us, the way that we think about food. And my great hope is that, having seen what it was like for the economic migrants who, at the lower end of the scale, who had no options, who were walking hundreds of kilometers to get home
Mm,
because there was no other way, all of those things. And I think that I have this thing that a lot of us we live disconnected from the source of our food, right? Uh, we uh, I'm not even getting into highly processed foods. Highly processed foods, I mean, there's some things that as a child, I had no idea what they came from, and it took me a long time to figure out what were the actual ingredients, right? Because we do, and not just the processing, but the way that it's been highly processed in the Western stage of preservatives and all of that. I don't
mm,
get in that. I mean, looking at a dosa, can you tell what goes into it
mm,
if you didn't know? Right? If you didn't know already, because it is very unlike what it came from. And a lot of Indian food also has so many strong flavors that I think that divide that I read about between European and South Asian styles of cooking being one of looking at the division being that Europe did have spicy food at one point in time, but that changed when uh, approximately when spices became too common, and therefore you had to find a way to sort of make yourself feel a little more special. And so things like meat-based sauces and letting the ingredients
mm,
come out became more important in European cuisine. Whereas in India, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it's a largely tropical country, and you need to preserve things for longer and make them last longer, all of these things. But, but yeah, I mean, so much. I've eaten things that I enjoyed and have no idea what I've eaten, because the ingredients, I can't taste the ingredients, I taste the flavors. And I guess the thing there of being, which is why I guess, the chili thing is something that I still hold to, and I don't like capsicum because it starts overwhelming the other stuff.
mm.
But yeah, so how is, I mean, now you've lived, aside from all the various places that you've lived in India, you've lived in Sri Lanka, you now live in Dubai. What are the differences you see in, I'm not talking about an approach to food and all so much, but like this broad division that I talked about between this European school of thinking and a South Asian school of thinking. What separates Sri Lankan from Indian? And I know this is a huge thing because India is so diverse in
Mm.
very many traditions. But if you had to find what would separate Sri Lankan food, what would separate Arab food from Indian food?
It's actually really fascinating because I think you see, I mean, I think if you were to do a comparative analysis, you can see that the food that we all eat, you can actually trace the travel and evolution of these ingredients as they have traveled, various shores and then reached us. Um, so, in fact, I was just reading this really fascinating, beautifully written piece by Ligaya Mishan in the New York Times on scorched rice. And this tradition whereby so many cultures fries scorched or burnt rice. You have the tahdig in Iranian, Persian cuisine. You have sokarat elsewhere, and you have, the Koreans have their own take on it. And one part of the piece addresses this idea that rice is so primal and so important to so many cultures. And for me, I think if you look at, like, I cannot compare Sri Lankan cuisine to an Indian cuisine because I think that's too large. But you can very clearly see how migration and travel has influenced the flavors, and most certainly the ingredients that are used. So, you do have the rice, you have the fish, you have the dals, you have spices. The spices, of course, play a much more central role because I think that Sri Lanka has always been a spice island, and it has been part of the ancient spice trade. But what's really interesting to me and was interesting as a journey of discovery is that there were so many subtle differences between South Indian food that I grew up with and Sri Lankan food. The basic, let's say, composition of a meal may be the same thing. You may have a rice, you may have a dal, you may have 2 or 3 vegetables, you may have meat. I never ate meat growing up, but in Sri Lanka, it's very much a part of like everyday. And some of the flavors may be similar. You may taste the coconut, which is a very prominent ingredient. You may taste spices like chili. Chili is huge in Sri Lankan food. So you can taste those things, and yet, as a whole, Sri Lankan rice and curry meal is not going to be the same as a Tamil or a Kannada rice and sambar, or rice and holi, or rice and anything, rasam. It's not going to be the same. There are huge differences in just the way, even though the meal may be structured in the same way, and even though rice may be at the heart of it, it still is very distinct in terms of flavor. And of course, I'm talking, when you talk about rice and curry, that's a Sinhalese, that's you're talking about the southern Sri Lankan food, which uses a lot of like powder and ground spices. Like curry powder is actually a big thing, and you have the roasted curry powder, you have unroasted curry powder, you have dark curry powder. And then when you go up north, you go to northern Sri Lanka, which I'm really biased towards Jaffna cuisine, because the first time I had it, it was such a revelation. Like the very first time I ate crab in my life, I never used to eat crab, was when I went to Jaffna for the first time. This was 2015. And my father-in-law's friend had a home chef who kind of sent 2 kilos of Jaffna crab curry to our hotel. And I wasn't at all sure that I was going to eat it because, like, first of all, it was just too fiddly and, all of that. And then I saw my husband and a friend of ours tucking into it. And there were like tears streaming down their eyes and they just could not stop. And I was like, okay, I need to figure, like, I was just like, I had FOMO, right? Like I had to taste this. I had to see what it was about. And then that's how I remember I had cuts all over my fingers. Like I was just so clumsy. But one of the lingering flavor memories from that meal is that the sweetness of the crab meat itself was really bolstered by the use of fennel powder, which is completely absent from Sinhalese cuisine. Oh, it's very, very like seldom used. And then, it was like this flavor of sauf and pepper and chili and all of that together. But also, like, even though it was a fiercely spicy dish, it also had this beautiful like sweetness that came from all these spices that somehow had a parallel to South India, but still tasted different. And then, the other like northern Sri Lankan thing I absolutely love is called Odial pool. It's a kind of seafood stew. Well, you can call it the Sri Lankan bouillabaisse or whatever. It's like this. Traditionally, it used to be made only on a Sunday, and whatever leftover seafood was there from, like things like crab shells, mussels, fish, all of it was thrown into this large pot. and cooked with a lot of tamarind. And it was undercut with moringa. Moringa is moringa leaves. And moringa leaves are a huge part of northern Sri Lankan cooking. And the reason is because it's one of the trees that kind of survives in this very hardy, almost desert climate of the north. So in just this little meal, I had an understanding of the fact that even though let's say the main components of the meal may be similar, like it may be rice, it may be whatever, but what you're eating is completely different, and it's so closely influenced by, you know, the geography of the area. It's so closely influenced by what's available, by the produce. In the case of northern Sri Lanka, which I hope to come back to at a slightly later point, I think it also has been influenced by war, and it has been influenced by the lack of ingredients during the war, because at various points, the movement of ingredients from one part of the country to the other was embargoed, because like the Sri Lankan government was using that as a way to control the LTT or to make life harder. So in fact, things like milk, things like flour were never easily available for large stretches during the war. So the cuisine has also developed as around those kind of constrictions, and it has kind of become something. I mean, I think a lot of it has been lost in terms of knowledge, but it has also become and evolved into something else because of like the conditions that were there for so many so it's a very good example of how cuisine organically changes as a result of contemporary circumstances, not just historical ones. So yeah, that's about Sri Lanka. As for the Middle East, I think rice is again a huge thing, but it's so different. You know, it's much more mildly flavored. It's almost always like you have the uzi, you have all these rice dishes. In fact, the New York Times, again, the Tea magazine carried this beautiful feature on rice. It was an exclusive on rice. And one of my favorite food writers, Diana Abu Jaber, wrote a beautiful piece on Jordanian mansaf, and how like mansaf is this kind of rice dish that has so much meaning for her as a person of the Middle East, as a Jordanian, and how she kind of struggled to find the version of it that she knew and recognized in the US. And then eventually when she did find it, she wonders aloud about authenticity and like what authenticity really means. And I think that this is such a great question. You keep coming back to it in food writing in so many different ways. What does authenticity really mean, and who holds the reins of authenticity? And I think that is one of my kind of biggest learnings from having lived in different cultures. It's that, that we all have we approach food. I mean, there are definitely differences in flavor and differences in ingredients, all of which are obviously influenced by the place and access to ingredients, but also that I think that we're all equally proud, equally, we all have the same primal relationship with food. And I think that is something that I feel is something that we need to explore more, through food writing or in other ways.
Yeah. When you talked about how Sri Lankan cuisine in the north had adapted to its circumstances, to contemporary circumstances, as you said, I was thinking as well about things like the origins of the rasgulla and chicory in coffee, or in fact, of the adoption of tea and coffee in India, which were not traditional beverages in India, have become intrinsically Indian now for so many people, and unthinkable to not have them around. But comparatively, in the long history of the subcontinent, comparatively recent import, as you know, as we've talked about in previous editions of the show, as are things like we call ourselves, the country of spices in India, but so many spices have their origins elsewhere. And even potatoes and
of course,
chilies and all of these come from elsewhere. Food migrates, food travels. And because I've asked this question just informally way before Table Talk was even a thought in my head, and asked people, what would you define Indian food by? And most people would say things like chilies and, the use of, and I was like, boss, the chili is comparatively recent. Yeah.
Very recent.
Yeah. In the course of a lifetime, no, but in the course of a civilization. And as as many Indians like to talk about the long history of Indian civilization, it is literally the last few minutes that these things have come in.
Mm.
But tell me a bit more about that northern Sri Lankan food. You said you wanted to come back to it. Let's talk more about it right now. What are the circumstances and the way that changed?
Mm. First of all, I think that I should set the stage a little bit by talking about what northern Sri Lanka is like for those who haven't been. Um, on my first trip to Jaffna in 2015, I was struck, let's say, haunted by the specter of loss that is just writ large, in the at least at that point, in the, broken walls of and the bullet holes. And I don't mean to make the sound more like macabre or whatever, but it was impossible to sidestep the fact that this was a region that had seen fighting for close to 30 years, and that the war had come to a very violent end. It was hard to ignore the silence of northern Sri Lanka. It really does feel like a completely different part of the country. And I found that it was much like, I was very eager, obviously, to try like northern Sri Lankan food, because I knew that it had that Sri Lankan Tamil inflection, which I was obviously interested in knowing more about. And also like just to understand the difference between like Sri Lankan food and like, Tamil food, as in Tamil food that I'm familiar with. And initially it was really hard for me to actually find northern Sri Lankan food in Jaffna. Like it was incredibly hard. And I think that was a result of the fact that the war was on for so long that people, used to mostly eat at home. And this concept of going out to eat and food as recreation took a long time to catch on. So I remember my very first visit with my father-in-law, who at that time was retracing his childhood. He had lived there as a boy, and he had gone to boarding school in Jaffna. So he had a remembrance of it from before, like during the war, even before the war. I remember we went to a restaurant, and I distinctly remember that it took them 3 hours to serve us our meal. And like I remember that it was like, it was just that they were so unaccustomed to people coming and dining, and it was just not like, they were just getting used to the idea that you can move about freely, that you can go out, and that whole culture of hospitality. It took a long time, and therefore my very first trip, the northern Sri Lankan food that I was able to access was from home chefs, which turned out incredibly well for me, because I think that we had, incredibly good food. And it was my very, very first taste of it. And I was just like, I was hooked in so many ways, because I felt like I had to understand the story. I had to understand like, what had happened here. I had to understand the erasure. And I knew that all of that reflected in the food in one way or the other. Eventually, over the course of several trips, a lot of things changed. And, I began to understand much more deeply, I'd imagine. In fact, wrote a piece for the Juggernaut. It was about this lady whose family they were a family of Ayurvedic practitioners. And they were very wealthy, and they were also like custodians of this ancestral knowledge, and it was her father and his father before that. And they came from great wealth, and obviously she has these, she kind of recollected what the feasts of her childhood used to be like, like they used to slaughter a goat, and like, she described to me that every single part of that goat would be used for the feast, like from the blood, which is called rattam, to like various other things. Everything was used. And and then all of a sudden during the war, like her family lost everything. Her father passed away, they lost the house, they lost the knowledge, and they had to restart in Colombo, a place that they had never been to before. And like in that story, she kind of sits with, like we both sit with the fact that so much of this culinary knowledge was completely lost. And she in fact happens to be in the food business, and she runs a home operation called My Sister's Kitchen in Colombo. She makes really good crab, as a matter of fact. um, but for me, I think I began to value the food of northern Sri Lanka much more, and I began to see it differently because it was tempered with the knowledge that something has been lost, and what remains is deeply precious. It's imbued with a certain importance, which I don't think we realize in everyday transactions. Because you take your food for granted, you don't think it's going to go anywhere. You don't think your recipe is under threat in any way. And then when something as life altering as a war happens and you've completely lost what you took for granted, suddenly what you do have, what you have left, has so much more value. And it was something that came back to me repeatedly. But also, like, I learned so many interesting things, like the fact that flour used to not be easily available because of embargoes, and therefore a whole bunch of bakeries in Jaffna naturally evolved to create biscuits and other baked goods with rice flour. They inadvertently adopting gluten-free before it became a thing. And this was fascinating to me, and I mean, it was just one of the many changes that northern Sri Lankans had to make. Like, many cars used to run on kerosene because petrol was embargoed. And when you think about a civilization that has overcome all of this and has continued to, well, I will say thrive, but I have to qualify that and say thrive, like survive, not thrive. But I think that learning and researching this food gave me a very deep sense of connection and purpose, which is something that I continue to seek in the kind of food writing I do. It's a meaning, and it's something that you learn, and something that stays with you. So yeah, I mean, that is northern Sri Lankan food in a nutshell. Incredibly good crab, incredibly good cool, but a whole lot of stories that come with it.
It's only in the last, a few years that I have read a lot more about Sri Lanka. I think starting with Saman Subramaniam's book, It's Divided Island, and that got me.
Yeah.
I have a few friends, online collaborators from the time of that horrible time, the tsunami, and I would keep in touch with them over the years. A few of us were in a collective that were trying to work on the effects, aid effects from there, and aid efforts during that time. Sri Lanka was awfully badly hit, of course, as was as well. But my curiosity really started from, because otherwise it was just this place where there seemed to be this never-ending conflict. And barring one friend from back in college days, I didn't really know very much about it. And yet there it is, just nearby, just next door. Literally minutes away if you're in the right part of India. And I don't know, we have this immense capacity also to not just be united by food, but also be divided by food, right? But I mean, we see enough of that in India at this point.
Absolutely.
Having the wrong food preferences can very literally get you killed. Yeah. So it's such a different country in so many ways. Because I remember when the parties of my childhood, when college friends would come over, and there would be vegetarian food because they were vegetarians as well. And you kept them aside, and people were really happily would have no issue with what else was being served. They were thankful, as a guest would be, that you had considered them. And because, for instance, I don't know what is on, I would check with people what they could eat and couldn't eat. Things like allergies and all that were not in my mind, not in my consideration set at that time. I knew about that. But at the very least, okay, someone's coming over who's Jain. There's a whole set of things that you can't give, right? You have to respect that. And similarly, there was no, it would be on the same table. Everyone went and served themselves. No one objected to what anyone else was eating. And that has changed so much in India.
I think it's also very telling of the fact that perhaps there was a time when we actively sought out people who were not just like us. I'm speaking for myself, and I'm speaking for maybe you and other people, who grew up in a certain idea. I'm very, I hold on to that idea. I take it very seriously. That to be Indian to me means to have at your table a bunch of people who are wildly different and have different backgrounds and who have different taste preferences, who have different cultural backgrounds. And for me, that was always the idea, like it was always the idea that I would learn, and I would, and I know I'm sounding really idealistic here, and kind of naive even, but my point is that, like, I think that I do think that there was a time when we used to seek out people who were not just like us, who were not just the same socioeconomic background, who didn't just have the same culinary preferences, who didn't eat at the same restaurants. And that was the whole point of it. And somehow I feel like the conversation has kind of slowly become stilted, because now more and more those divisions are so, they're not just lines in the sand anymore. They're real differences. They're real prejudices, and people seem to want to only meet people who are like themselves, and that's tragic, I think.
But I mean, there is hope as well. I mean, I take hope in this. I told you before that the idea for Table Talk came from a group I started last year in
Yeah.
lockdown. It's called Simple Recipes. And from that time, there have been fights. There has been conflict in that group. There have been people who have got really, really angry, and they have been very unpleasant times. But overall, what I have seen is one, a spirit of helpfulness. All right. You put a request out and there are 10 replies minimum with different answers on what you can do. There is curiosity. Oh, okay, that is what you call what I know as this, Tindley, we call it Dundakailo, how do you make it? How do you make it? Okay, that's how you do it. How do they make it in Bengal? And I see that curiosity and I see that openness. We worked hard to make that happen in the group, to not let people divide along those lines, to be sure that respect was a huge part of the equation. But yes, I did work on that, but no, it wasn't a difficult task. People understood what it was from. I don't have to police the group by and large. It runs on its own. Occasionally, there will be a spot of unpleasantness and name calling, and someone will leave in a huff or someone will shout at each other. But mostly, it's lovely to just see the open-mindedness, the questing, and not just about Indian food, but all over, okay, so that's what you call it in your country, or an Indian person living abroad, like Apurva has mentioned in the comments, talking about finding mango lassi and tanin in the Netherlands, right? And the way people have adapted to, I mean, mango was such a sore point for so many of my friends in America, because Indian mangoes were not allowed. South America didn't allow you to import mangoes, and they were like, we have to eat fucking Mexican mangoes and South American mangoes, and we can't get whatever their favorite Indian mango is also something that we love to fight about, good humored kind of way, on which mango is the best. But yeah, okay, so you live now at another global crossroads, right? You live in Dubai, where aside from the local cuisine, Dubai is largely a modern creation, right?
Absolutely.
Something that has been built by people from all over the world. And what's that?
Largely from South Asia, though. Yeah. Mostly by South Asians. Yeah, you were asking me.
Yeah. So what's it been like? What's it been like in Dubai? How's the food journey progressed there?
I will say that I'm extremely spoiled for choice in Dubai. And just to illustrate, I'm going to go back to your earlier point about mangoes. I want to write about this at some point. The best Alfonsos come into the market in Dubai a whole 2 or 3 weeks before they hit markets in India.
I know, I'm very bitter.
And so essentially from March until August, maybe September, I realized that being in, see, there are two aspects to it. One, of course, is that you have you have a large Indian population, a large South Asian population here. And but I will say, especially Indian, who are able to satisfy whatever, like they, every desire of theirs, like everything that you're nostalgic for, they are willing to pay top dirham for it. And if you're willing to pay top dirham for it, literally anything, everything is available here. There's a chain of Indian supermarkets called Ala Adil, and walking into them feels like taking it's like an olfactory mnemonic almost, like you can just smell all the Indian smells. And the very first time I went there, I was like, okay, I'm not so lost in a new city because I have found my way somewhere. Like this is a place where if nothing works out, I can just come and find something and I will not feel as lost, So like, I think if you're willing, if you have the disposable income, if you're discerning in taste, Dubai, you will not feel like you've left India at all. Like they say, the common joke is Dubai is India's cleanest city or whatever that is. Like there are multiple iterations of this, but the essential fact being that it's an extension. It's like a long arm reaching into the Middle East from India, but it feels like the connection is really, really strong. But the other interesting thing is that it's not just the Indians, it's the Pakistanis, it's the Bangladeshis, it's the Sri Lankans. So from like March until September this year, for the first time in my life, I had access to different kinds of mangoes. Like initially it was the Alfonso, then it was a Kesar, then it was a Chausa, then it was a Langda, then it was like the Pakistani mangoes came in for a little bit, the Sindri, various other things. And then after that, the Egyptian mangoes, which are fantastic. Oh, and therefore,
Egyptian mangoes, okay.
Oh, they're brilliant. Like they're just so wonderful. And the Imam Pasand from Hyderabad, which is so difficult to get. And so, you feel like you have had a kind of 360 experience almost just by virtue of being here, because of the fact that there are so many communities that come together over here, and just because those communities need to eat. And like, for instance, one of the things that I so deeply love is that I will make an honest confession that I love jamun, like the fruit, more than I love mangoes. I wait for them because when I was growing up in Ratlam, my grandparents had 2 large jamun trees, and I have grown up eating that fruit. And like, even when it came to Bombay or wherever I lived, I would seek it out like the very first of the season. And one of the things that delighted me so much about being in Dubai is that the Pakistani shops here will import the best jamuns from Lahore in the baskets, like with the labeling that says, from Lahore or whatever. It'll come straight in a basket. And what was fascinating is that I went to a supermarket actually looking for jamun, and I realized that there were so many other people like me who had already done their little setting. I said, "Hamara packet up piche rakho, hum aake le lenge baad mein." Like, and when you think that you live in a place where people are so passionate about finding this one little fruit, like falsas from Lahore, like jamun from Karachi, mangoes from Egypt, they all come here. And in the recent past, I've actually been really obsessed with understanding how the grocery store is such a signifier of home in a place like Dubai, because you really get to understand the aspirations of all the various communities who come and live here, and it's not, I'm talking about South Asia, but you have the Filipinos, you have the South Africans, you have the Africans from so many different countries. And for me, that small grocery store is such an indication. Like, if you're willing to spend some time there and think about it, it's such a great indicator of both the things that, of the fact that migration is so writ into the culture of the city, but also that food is so integral to that experience. And that, people will, like, what are the things that people miss when they stay away from home? All you need to do is walk into a supermarket and you will find the answer. And I just finished reading Crying in H Mart, which is such a lovely book. I have it here with me in case anybody is interested. It's based on a New Yorker essay by Michelle Zauner. And H Mart is a series of, is a chain of Korean grocery stores in the US. And she is half American and half Korean. And she writes about how it's based on the fact that, her mom was Korean. And like, so she got her initial training in understanding Korean flavors when they went to H Mart. And after her mom died of cancer, suddenly that place also became like, it was where she felt the full weight of her identity, and the fact that there was nobody that she could call to ask, like, what is the brand of seaweed that she needed to buy, let's say. And I feel like I am really obsessed with this idea, because here, like, my local grocery store in Karama. Karama is like one of the oldest parts of Dubai. It's old Dubai. It's not glamorous. It's not downtown where I live. Um, but my vendor in Karama fish market, and I specifically go to a fish market or to a wet market because I dislike chain supermarkets. I never go. This guy speaks no less than 7 or 8 languages, and in his tiny store, you will find Vietnamese noodles, Chinese noodles, Japanese ingredients, Filipino ingredients, Indian ingredients, Arab ingredients, all of them. And he can speak all of those languages because they are all the people who come there, and they're all seeking different things. And for me, the grocery store is such a great way to understand the aspirations, the desperations, the longings of people who have left home and who have come somewhere else, and they're looking to recreate what they've left behind. And there's a great poignancy to that, which is not written about enough, which I really want to write about, hopefully soon. But that's the sort of thing that excites me about a place like Dubai, that it's got so much. There's so many layers if you're willing to look for them. A lot of people don't end up looking for the layers because there's just so much other stuff that's going on. Like, people say that Dubai is superficial, but that's probably because you're not looking in the right places. I mean, you go to a star restaurant, you're probably not going to find much nuance there except for very good food at very good prices, or at high prices. But if you're willing to go to other places, there's just so much depth here, and it's only about discovering it.
Just brief segue on one thing that you said about the shopkeeper with the 7 languages. I think that really, we in India, we're going through a phase, and we've been living with this for a while, of language chauvinism, of a lot of people feeling very strongly about Hindi, which is really practically a constructed language that happened at a certain time, developed from things and became codified in a certain kind of way, but descends from other languages. And with the right incentives, you don't have to impose a language. People want to learn it, right? If you're going to force Hindi down Malayali's throat, he's going to resent you. If you make Hindi attractive, or English, or Tamil, they will speak it, they will understand, because, I mean, why not? I mean, I think Bollywood would have, I hate using the term, but I prefer to think of it as the Hindi cinemas, where everybody knows what you're talking about when you're saying Bollywood, would be a far bigger ambassador in the way that American television is a great ambassador for, America. Recently, there was this thing of a bunch of American children all suddenly started speaking with British accents because of the popularity of something called Peppa Pig.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So language and all of that will travel happily when when there is incentive, when there is something in it for me to learn. Your shopkeeper is the value of being able to communicate with 7 nationalities, with 7 different kinds of speakers of different languages, and it's good for him. It widens the circle. The people who come there are happier with him and will probably never go anywhere else after they've encountered him. Yeah, because here's a man who has taken the trouble to learn my language. It's a huge compliment.
And it's fascinating to me. Like, I actually sometimes just take a stool and sit there and just watch him interact with people, because I want to understand the texture of this transaction that happens between a customer who is clearly delighted that somebody who's not from his culture can speak his language and can you hear him speak, like he will speak Bahasa. The next minute he will switch to Malayalam. The next minute he'll switch to Hindi. The next minute he'll switch to, if a Filipino walks in, he'll speak in Tagalog. And to think that it's the same store, it's the same physical space, it's the same vegetables, I mean, he does talk a great variety, but it's not a glamorous, like, it's not one of those like Pali market type, where you get it's a very, very down to earth kind of store. And to think that there's one physical store, which is just, I wish I could share a picture. It's got like, it's stacked up to like a ceiling with like these boxes of like noodles and sauces. And it was actually only when I actually went there and sort of stood there and looked at all the different sauces that I realized that there are so many different people from so many different cultures who are coming here for the same experience. And the people who come there clearly come there because they want to have that interaction, because they, you can have the stuff delivered home. And sure enough, there are a lot of people who do that, because like literally even a toothbrush will come to your doorstep at midnight in Dubai, and like you don't have to think twice about it. But for somebody like me, that interaction is very important for me. Getting like having this little like chit chat, like trying to understand, like for instance, last winter he got this. I always ask him कि अभी क्या है, अभी क्या आने वाला है India से. So he'll be like, अभी अवरेका आया है, चाहिए क्या? It's like, the green avrekai, which is like the Bangalore has a whole Avrebelli festival and all of that. And like I have not had it in so long, and then suddenly here's this guy. He's like, "Abhi aaya hai, chahiye kya?" And then otherwise it'll be like, I remember in the summer he was like, "बस 10 minute wait करो madam, जामुन अभी अभी आ रहा है." And I actually waited there. No, I left, I think, because I'm in a hurry. And then he called me and he was like, "हाँ madam, अभी जामुन आया, अभी आ जाओ, हाँ जल्दी, आपके लिए 2 box रखा है." And it's like, the immediacy of this interaction cannot be had when you go to a Carrefour or like, a Lulu supermarket or whatever, where you just don't interact with people. You're interacting with the shelf.
Mhm.
And here, like, this is a relationship that that is based on a mutual understanding of why this flavor, this ingredient is so important to me, and what you will do to allow me to have access to it. And I think the transactionality of that, and I think that there's I think there's a very treasured interaction. And and I've learned so much about Dubai just by these conversations I've had with people, just by talking to my vegetable vendor. It may sound really funny, but honestly, I'm obsessed with like markets. I'm obsessed with wet markets. I'm obsessed with fish markets. I'm obsessed with grocery stores, the smaller ones, because they tell me so much about what the city actually is. And this is not something that you can learn by reading a book. And Dubai cannot be read in that way at all. You can't understand Dubai by looking at it. I mean, you can understand one aspect of it if you read restaurant reviews, if you read if you follow all the glossy magazines, you'll see one aspect of it. But there's more to it under the surface, and the only way you're going to get access to that is if you have these inroads. For me, a big inroad is food. For others, it may be other things.
That very important thing that you touched on, the local shop, the neighborhood, the relationships that you have. And it's something that we kind of lose sight of in a world where everything is an app call away or something will get delivered.
Absolutely.
And I sort of was always a proponent of this and realized how valuable it was during peak lockdown, and to just be able to, when I wasn't feeling very well, to call and say, and the guy is coming here with one packet of, whatever that I wanted, It's literally peanuts.
Yeah.
Right? Because I wanted to make something and like, can you send it? I'm in the middle of something, and he's come a 5-minute bike ride away, bearing one packet of peanuts and a big smile to give it to me, because he's the guy who comes and gives my stuff all the time, and no extra charges, nothing. It's part of it, right? And that relationship is so important. I mean, there are things. My parents have been, dead for some time now. I go to the old neighborhood where I live. If I'm passing by there is still conversation to be had with people who only knew my parents and really didn't know me. But yeah, before we go on, I want to not lose sight of the one thing that I do like to do here, which is completely off topic. You choose the Banyan as your charity. We'll spend a few minutes talking about why their work, and we'll come back to the rest of the conversation. But why did you choose the Banyan? And folks, for those of you coming in for the first time again, Table Talk is free to attend and it will stay free as for as long as I can afford to do it. But we ask all our guests to nominate a charity that they support or a cause or fundraiser. And we ask guests, and this is not a condition, do it only if you can afford it. And if you think, if you like, please support the cause. I'm putting the Banyan's link there. If you would like to say thank you to Vidya for this conversation, the best way to do that is to make a little donation at the Banyan. But tell us why you chose the Banyan.
Um, I happen to actually know a little bit about the kind of work that the Banyan does because Vandana Gopikumar, who is the co-founder of the Banyan, is part of my extended family, my husband's family actually. So I've had a kind of ringside view of the work that she has done towards, like, the Banyan started sometime in the 1980s, and it started with Vandana and her co-founder Vaishnavi's passion for helping mentally ill women. Actually, it started with them finding one homeless mentally ill woman and trying to rehabilitate her, or at least give her a place to live. And since then, it has grown into a much larger network which does important work for women and mental health and not only women, but women is a primary focus, because I think mental health and mentally ill women so often fall through the cracks of the system, if there was a system in the first place. So their work extends all over Chennai and Tamil Nadu, bits of Maharashtra, Karnataka as well. And what really impresses me is that, their commitment towards the cause is towards the cause of mental health as a whole, and towards homelessness and mental health, and helping women who have fallen by the wayside or fallen through the cracks. Is their commitment runs really deep. The Banyan now supports, I don't know the exact numbers, but they support a large number of women. They have a huge they have a center in Chennai. But also, like, so many of these women have actually formed kind of band among themselves, and they find a greater sense of like kinship, community, purpose, and all of that through the work of the Banyan. And I deeply admire their commitment to mental health and to it's also personal to me because my older brother is autistic, and he has had his struggles with mental health over the years. He's an amazing resilient person, and he's overcome a lot of that. Also, I think my parents have had a huge role to play in that. But also, this is something that is personal to me. I understand what it means to not, like, I imagine that if my brother didn't have this network or this kind of financial background or this kind of care, or if he didn't have all of those things, he very well could have been one of those people who ended up on the street. And therefore, like, the possibility of making a difference to somebody else through this, and especially through the work that the Banyan does, is very important for me personally. And that's the reason why I chose the charity.
I know what you mean. There's so much there that in less developed in developing countries, things like mental health and mental illness and disabilities of various kinds are low priority, don't get enough attention, and need that attention. Even just statistically, if you look at the number of people who live with some kind of disability or debilitating condition in this country is rather large, but so many of them are invisible because that's the way it is, right? But that's a conversation for another time. I will come back to, or there are questions from the audience, but I want to look at, before we do that, food writing particularly, and your journey within that. What made you make that an area? I know we've touched on this in many different ways in the course of this last hour and a half that we've been chatting, but specifically I want to put this all together on your adding this thing of your interaction, your relationship with food, now your relationship with writing and food, and how did those work, and how did that develop in you?
Well, I've been a journalist for a long time now. I've been a journalist for much longer than I've spent writing about food. I initially worked with Time Out Bombay. I was trained by Naresh and Jerry, and I had that kind of really firm uh, training. And then I worked in a number of publications until BBC Good Food kind of happened to me in 2011. It was an opportunity that came my way. I'll be frank and say that when I joined, I had no idea that I would be able to write about food. Like I'd never written about it. Um, but and it was also the very first time that an international food magazine was coming to India. We were a very small team. We were all like deeply under pressure, but it was almost like I began writing about it and I wondered why I hadn't for that long. Like it was just so natural. Like it felt like it felt like something that I just fell into without any effort. Because I found that food is such a great way to talk about the world as it moves and works, and people and community and and politics and race and all of those things. And it's almost like it offers you a portal to talk about all of these things without necessarily having, like, I'm not a political writer, but I can tell you about the politics and food. You know what I mean? So it was just, I mean, it just felt like a very, very natural. Initially it felt like a natural progression, and later I realized that, as I've mentioned, it gave me also the opportunity to think about my personal relationship with food, which I had never really critically analyzed. I think I've always loved food, but it was not something that I had actually really stopped to give any thought, because I suppose it was just one facet of my life. But the moment I had the opportunity, I realized that it was also, I fell into it so naturally, because it had always been an important part of my life, and because it was always something that I valued. Um food writing happened to me. Like, I got an opportunity, I kind of ran with it. Um but over the last 7 or 8 years, I have done the kind of food writing that I personally feel very passionate about. I don't often write about restaurants. I don't often write about like trends. And this is a personal choice, because for me, the conversations that interest me, that challenge me when it comes to food, is trying to understand people through it, and trying to understand my own journey through it. I mean, my own journey is a smaller part of it, I think, because yeah, it's there, but it's also not my primary preoccupation. On the other hand, I like to call it like the intersection of food and anthropology, but I'm not like, it's not like I've studied anthropology. It's that broad framework of trying to understand like people and communities and nations, and like I said, war, all of those things through this prism of food. And I find that is something that will never be boring for me. It will always be fascinating, and there's always so much to learn, to study. And that's essentially kind of how food writing happened for me. But as for writing, I think writing has been a part of my life since I was like very young. It was just a way for me to understand myself. Even to this day, if I don't understand what's going on in my head, I will just need to put it down in words, and then I understand what I'm thinking in my head. So it's a very, very, it's an act of like, it's almost an act of survival for me to be able to write. And food writing has really helped me understand a great deal of things. Um, Among them, also my own relationships with food, with the world. So yeah, I mean, I think that I don't, I can't put a definite, I can't trace a definite journey, because it feels like so much has happened, and also in a sense that it just happened, and then from there on it's just been a natural evolution. It was all like I was meant to find it and I found it, and then since then it's been wonderful.
And I mean, I struggled for a while with this myself in different kinds of ways, because I was like, I wanted to write music and book reviews and all of that kind of thing as a young person starting out, and never really got into it. And I realized much later that it came with that really the best reviews that I had read were not just about what was being reviewed. When it
Mm.
came to books or whatever, the book reviewers that I read were not reviewers, they were critics. They were people deeply involved who gave you insight, who gave you a lot of understanding. I mean, I wrote a few food reviews for Naresh back on the Time Out days. He would give me the New Bombay restaurants and say, "Can you just do this one for me," kind of thing. And once in a while, he threw me a toffee and say, "Come, I'm going out to dinner. Come with me. We'll go and eat somewhere." But I realized that I would not at that point in time. And I look back at those reviews now, and I realized that I was being just a reviewer. I was just saying, okay, this is what I ate. I could give you nothing more about it than that. And perhaps that's why Naresh never gave me very many reviews to write at that time.
No, I just say it was a very popular beat. Everybody wanted to do it. Everybody wanted to write about food. Like there were just too many takers for it at the time.
And I understood this in a different kind of way when I started writing for Outlook Traveler. Because there again, all the writers that I admired were not doing a like, go here, see this, do that. Right?
Absolutely.
It told you about the place. And, I think Traveler and the Kai and Nayantara,
yeah,
all of those.
Absolutely. Oh, that was the golden time of Outlook Traveler. I really wanted to work there at the time. I wrote to Kai and I said, please give me a job. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Kai would not tell people he was coming to Bombay because he knew he would be besieged. People wanting to meet him. I was very lucky that I got in because someone had read something that I had written and recommended to someone who worked on the team. And so Traveler came to me by
That's lovely.
Group, right?
Yeah.
And every little while I'd go and travel to some different days. Only remember that once that I think that just before I started working full time again, they did an issue on spas. I called Nayantara with greatly upset and said, "You didn't send me to a spa after all the places I've done for you. I could have used a spa." And she's like, "Do you like this kind of thing? Do you?" And I was like, "What? No." Yeah, but yeah, the whole thing of like, it's slipping my mind who said this. But writing about cricket and you can't write about cricket really if that's all that you know, right? There's so much that you have to know. And about food as well. And I love this journey that you're taking there. I'll have two questions then. One is, when you write, how does the process go for you from the moment of glimmering of this is what I want to do a piece on to when it's ready?
Torture. When I actually begin to write it, I'm very much the tortured writer. Like I will pace about, I will berate myself. I'll be like, this piece is never going to get done. I mean, I'll get to that. But essentially for me, the pieces I have written have all come from actually months of just sitting with an idea. I know that this is not a very practical way to go about it. And I want to issue a disclaimer that if you want to make a living out of freelance writing, please don't do it like I have done. Because honestly, it's not practical. It's not pragmatic to sit with an idea for months and months and months. But that's just who I am. I need to sit with ideas for a long time. I need to see the connections. I need to explore an idea for what it's worth. I need to let it kind of almost soak in my head until all these various strands of ideas, of thoughts reveal themselves to me. And until I feel like I'm ready to say something about it. That's just been my process so far. Like, for instance, shortly before I moved here, I had read Diana Abu Jaber's book, which is absolutely beautiful, where she describes kunafa, the Middle Eastern dessert. And, I had never eaten kunafa at that time, and I kind of fell in love with her description of it. It was just something just so profoundly beautiful and poetic about her description of it, that when I knew that I was moving to Dubai, I remember I made my husband buy kunafa and bring it back to me in Sri Lanka. It was very, very bad by the time it got there, but so that was like something that I really wanted to, it kind of stuck in my head, and it became a thing that I needed to dig and dig and dig and dig further. And I spent many months thinking about kunafa, eating a lot of kunafa, eating my body weight in kunafa, until I came to a point where I was ready to say something about it. And wrote a piece about how kunafa is something that is like shared by the Levantine countries. Like it's something that so many countries are proud of. You know, it's Middle Eastern in the truest sense. That, you know, the Turkish love it, the Syrians like it, the Palestinians, of course, feel like it's legitimately a part of their food culture, because one of the most famous forms of kunafa is nabulsi. Nabulsi is actually a place in Palestine, and it's named after the cheese that is made in that particular village in Palestine. And yet, all of these countries feel a shared claim to it. And I was trying to examine what that means in terms of, like, you know, can food really belong to a culture? Like from the Palestinian perspective, food is the one thing that actually does belong to them. And somehow, you know, kanafe becoming this hip new dessert means that it is completely divorced from its cultural context. And therefore, from the Palestinian perspective, it's almost like cultural erasure. And yet you look at the fact that culture can culture really be constrained within borders, within boundaries, especially when you consider that at one point the Levant was one contiguous geographical spread without boundaries. And what that says about this particular food, like I use this food to talk about all of these broad ideas. I wrote it for LitHub. I'm just going to put um I'll just paste a link here. But essentially, this is, you know, it took a long time for me to work on that piece. But I was really happy with its outcome. You know, I was really happy with what I managed to say. And I mean, apart from the happiness and apart from how it turned out, the process was important to me because it gave me the sense of understanding something about the world that went beyond what was on my plate. I mean, as delicious as that plate of food is, it says something that's far beyond, you know, the contours of that plate. And that, in a nutshell, is what I'm trying to do with my writing. Also, what I'm trying to do with Whetstone. Yeah. So essentially, this is how. So the process takes a long time because, like, I have to understand all of these. Like, I take my time to kind of go through it. The actual writing is torture. Like, it's just like I don't know how I can do this. I can't do it. My deadline, and like I should have never taken this on and all of that, and then it eventually comes together. But this is like a tortured like writing process. I'm not a, like, as much as I would love to say that I wake up every day and write 500 words, I'm not that person. Like, you know, I write as a way of understanding myself, but sometimes that process is more torture than it should be.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. No, and when you look to commission, when you think, what do you look for in writers for people who might want to be pitching you with work?
I'm looking for, I won't I won't say that I'm always looking for something new or like a different story, because it's not practically possible. Like sometimes you have to write up a straight up food history piece, and that's fine, you know. But what I'm looking for is definitely a voice, somebody who has something to say. Like, you know, you don't have to be a prolific writer to pitch me, but you should have something to say. You know, you should have something to say that I don't know. Like if you surprise me with a nugget of information that I didn't know about, and there's a lot that I don't know. If you surprise me with a nugget of information that I had no prior idea about, and you can tease that idea into a story, I'd be interested. Um, but also I'm looking to be surprised. I'm looking to be like, I want, you know, this is a piece that I recently commissioned. It was a piece about how Rajma Chawal has suddenly become like this comfort food, like a universal comfort food. And she challenges the idea that it is universal in any sense. You know, she's like, all these chefs say, oh, Rajma Chawal is my comfort food. I'm broadly paraphrasing this piece because it's much more complex than this, but I'm just trying to say that I had never thought about it that way. You know, I had never thought about the fact that comfort food is also like, so it has become a stereotype almost, and how like that can be reductive in its own way, you know, because comfort food for you and me and everybody else is going to be different. For somebody, it may be like chorizo pao, you know, And like, but if you have this way of defining what the national comfort food is, you're obviously eliminating so many people from that conversation. I was so surprised by that pitch, and I felt like he was thinking in such an intelligent way about something that all of us know about, all of us have probably seen, but not really kind of thought about in that way. And I was very, very intrigued, and I immediately commissioned that piece. Um, so, in that way, like, I'm very lucky that I come across people who are thinking really differently about common everyday things, and who are willing to put in the labor to kind of educate me and educate everybody else about these. So I'm always looking to be surprised. I'm looking to be challenged. I'm looking for a way of thinking and writing about food that is not stereotypical. And and I think in other ways, I'm also looking for food history pieces that just teach me something. But in my opinion, the best kind of food writing for me is something that surprises me.
I am just trying to find a question that was very specific earlier in the chat. It was about Kottu or something at that point. Do you recall? Thoughts on how Kottu roti, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Kottu roti, Kottu parita, the South Indian delicacy. Any idea how it originated? This is from Geeta Sukumaran.
Yeah.
I would like to know more about this as I'm planning an essay.
Okay, so from what I understand, Kottu roti was essentially a way of making use of leftover paratas or rotis, mostly made of Malabar parota, because I think Malabar parotas are just more hardy and kind of like tend to survive better than your normal parotas. And especially because I think this is very much in the Kerala context, and Malabar parotas are the kinds that are eaten there. But I think essentially they were trying to make leftover paratas just last a bit longer. And it's a classic hack, right? Like if you have leftover bread, make bread upma out of it. If you have leftover idlis, make idli upma out of it. So I think that essentially what they were looking for was to make a snack out of leftover paratas, but just make it last longer and make it kind of more filling. So I think that what they did was they just put a whole bunch of like leftover ingredients, including leftover veggies and parota, and just threw in some sauces. I think one of the main things about kottu roti or kottu paratha is the fact that it has a spectacle attached to it. Like it's that, that very rhythmic kind of chopping motion. It is also the sound. So I think that kottu paratha as a concept was just a clever way of making use of leftovers. It has a parallel in kottu roti in Sri Lanka, which is the de facto national street food, which is enjoyed by everybody. In Sri Lanka, the kottu roti is very much an audio-visual sense. It's a snack for the senses, because you have it's a very, very like the rhythmic kind of cutting of the roti into small pieces, like the sloshing of the sauces, and it's always in the evening, and you have the background of the traffic or whatever it is, and so kottu roti was a way of making use of leftovers, but now I feel like it is very much like I said, a snack for the senses. But I would be curious to know more. This is from my understanding of it and from my experience of eating it. But if Geeta, if you find out more, please let me know.
This is actually a question that came up to me as well during the lockdown phases, because there's so many of the recipes that people, I think one of the things I told you there was that I expected membership of the group to be largely people like me, pretty incompetent in the kitchen and needing help. But it was actually the majority of the people in the group were people who are very competent in the kitchen, share their expertise, also coping with a world that was where supplies were in short supply, all that kind of thing. So that was also a part of the process. But one of the things that came up there was this, like I said, where you understand more about society. These were women who were working, trying to work from home, like the other members of their family, struggling to work with that and deal with that. But also expected to put 3 fresh meals on the table a day.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Or one. In households which seem to have not exactly come to terms with the idea that refrigeration exists and that you could
Yeah.
use the fridge and take it out again. The
Correct.
pressure to construct something like a kotoroti or some other thing of leftovers, because you actually couldn't take it out of the fridge and serve it to people.
Yeah.
You wanted something that looked different from what they had for lunch or what they had the previous day.
Yeah.
And that to me was I mean, yes, there was an amazing inventiveness. People were proud of the improvisations they came out with and the way that they made these things taste different. But it took me a while to get beyond the fact that they had to do this because of living in a patriarchal kind of setup.
Absolutely.
And that was so much a part of this. There
are 2 questions here. Should we
coming to those in a
answer
second.
them? Yeah.
I'm going to ask you also, Vidya, to, at some time during the week, you mentioned various books and articles.
Yeah. Of course.
If you could, I will then send it out to everyone who attended the talk. A sort of a reading and watching list.
Absolutely, yeah. Will do.
So I have 2 questions and a raised hand from Geeta. Geeta, if you could let me know in the chat whether you would like to ask your question in voice or to even come on video, that would be fine. But let me take in the meantime Rana Khan's question. Vidya's point about loss of food culture resonated with me, as I see that my own adult children, both foodies, are also hugely appreciative of other cuisines and do not necessarily have the nostalgia that I have for my own Eastern UP food. What would you advocate, Vidya, regarding this gradual loss of our food culture, which seems part of the migration process? I've been writing recipes down and hopefully I will start a food blog, but it is sad to see they may not be as passionate about aloo soya as I am.
That's a really good question. And I think that it's very complicated. I will be honest and say that I don't think that our connection to food or the food we grew up with is necessarily an easy relationship. And it's not a simple relationship either, because I think so much of what, and this is something that I struggle with on a daily basis, because like I grew up with a certain kind of cuisine and I don't cook it very often, because I think that so much of it depends on your particular family circumstance, on what other people in the family enjoy, what you enjoy eating, what's convenient, what's easy to make. And those are all factors that come into your appreciation of like the cuisine that you probably grew up with. And that to me, the practicality of it is what complicates our relationship with food, especially the food that we grew up with. But having said that, I think that there's definitely value in recording your recipes and in recording. Like, I think one of the things that, in fact, during the pandemic, my grandmother, she's a remarkable woman who lives by herself in Mysore at the age of 93, by choice. Like, she's always wanted to live by herself. She was diagnosed with cancer. And I think that in that swell of emotions, which came about because like we were already separated because of a pandemic, and also suddenly I wasn't sure how she was gonna fare in the months to come. I suddenly felt this pang that I probably would not be able to taste her cooking for a long time, or maybe ever. I'm touch wood, she's doing much better, and like I said, she's truly remarkable. But having said, it was a very threatening prospect to me at the time, that I probably would not be able to taste her especially her cooking, because I think that it's such a good example. Like my grandmother, like most grandmothers, is an accomplished cook, and the fact that that this was a version of our cuisine that she represented so ably, and I wasn't sure that I would be able to access it in quite that way. And suddenly I began to feel like I had to cook all the things that she made just because I needed to know that it was part of my food lexicon. I needed to know that knowledge was not lost to me. So I actually began cooking a lot of the food that she would make. I don't cook it nearly half as well as her. So, there's also like a bit of sweetness there. But I do think that there is a value in recording recipes, in making note of them, because I think putting it down in some way or the other, like either by way of a blog, either by way of a notebook. There are so many people who come to the realization about the food they miss late in life, and they need to have, like, I mean, it would be great for them to have clues to find their way back. It's like breadcrumbs, and if you can, if recipes are the breadcrumbs, they can find the way back to the flavors that they so much miss. And while I don't have a specific answer to this question about how you can preserve loss, or how you can prevent loss due to migration, I do think that there is such a great value in recording, in making notes, in preserving recipes in whichever form, because I think that's the way for you. They may not realize it now, but maybe 10 years from now, suddenly it'll be like, oh shit, like I really, really miss aloo soya. How do I make it? And if they have, a way to make that, then that knowledge is not lost.
Absolutely. I just sort of like add to that, and so much there, Rana, that is, there are projects. I mean, one of my previous guests on the show was Rushina Munjag, who has called herself culinary chronicler, who's going around helping to preserve these recipes. A couple of my future guests are involved in chronicling projects of the same kind. One is a group of very young people just out of college who did it as a project and has become, something standalone, and something from. I come from a hybrid culture. I'm Anglo-Indian. It is a sort of smash culture, and there's this woman called Bridget White Kumar.
Of course, yeah.
Wonderful blog. She's going to be a guest of mine.
Oh, nice.
For me, I didn't learn to cook for my mother, and my mother passed away, and there had been many years by the time I tried to cook some of this stuff. And it's thanks to a few friends who gave me their mother's recipes, and going to Bridget's blog, that I was able to recreate,
absolutely,
for instance, what we, in a joking kind of way, refer to as the Anglo-Indian national dish, which is coconut rice and ball curry, right? Which served with devil chutney. That is a staple, minced meatballs in a curry with coconut rice. And I missed that, and I couldn't get it. That's not something you can order anywhere, right?
Absolutely.
And I wanted to make that, and I was able to recreate it during lockdown. And projects like these are sticky as hell. They last. People, and it doesn't even need to lead anywhere. It can Bridget Kumar has grown that into, authoring several books.
Absolutely.
Content. But there is another person, Usha Prabhakaran, who we were talking about, wrote a cult book on pickles with no other purpose in life for that project other than to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
He happily gave the book away free to anyone who give them PDFs. So these things will live on, and if you want to do it, you should just do it, Rana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nostalgia is this really powerful thing, and that sort of connects also in a weird kind of way with what Sumita is asking, which is, she says, and I'm partly disagreeing with her, in South Indian food, what we get in a restaurant would be pretty much similar to what is cooked in homes, which is the part I disagree with.
Yeah.
But when it comes to North Indian food, what goes on offer in restaurants is never made at home. Paneer pasanda, paneer whatever. Different communities have specific cuisine, but it's not available outside of homes. I do have a kind of answer to that, which we have talked about in Table Talk before. Just that I'll let Vidya answer that, but simplistically, Sumita, cooking on a small scale for a family is very different from cooking at a large scale, and there's some things that work on a large scale and some things that work better on a small scale. That is the sort of layperson's very simple answer that I can give you as someone who has not looked into this deeply. But Vidya, could you take that, please?
Sure. I think there are a bunch of things. First of all, I should clarify that what we get in restaurants is a lowest common denominator of what people like to eat. Usually it's a factor of stereotype, a factor of what is broadly considered comfort food and broadly considered popular. And also it is a factor of of the fact that people don't like to be challenged when it comes to food a lot of the times. You want to know what you're getting into, you know. Which means that what you get in restaurants is often a very poor approximation of what you would get in a home. Like South Indian food in a restaurant is truly not, unless you went to a specialty restaurant, unless you went to Calicut Paragon in Dubai, or, you know, or an equivalent in wherever else, you're not going to get what is Malayali food. And even that Malayali is like the most popular Malayali thing. You know, you're not going to get the fine distinction between, you know, the North Malabar like food of the Muslims. You're not going to get that fine distinction. You're going to get a generic export that has been deemed popular by the people who bring it to a particular place and who run it by their very careful math and realize that this is something that will make me money. So what you see in a restaurant is usually a pale approximation of what you would get at home. And also, unfortunately, what happens with restaurants is that because they're so difficult to run and because the economics of making a restaurant profitable are so complex, you really can't afford to take on, or restaurateurs are very rarely wanting to take big risks, you know. Like you can't offer, like if you put a dish on the menu thinking, this is really different, this is authentic, this is from here, and this is a family recipe. And if it doesn't do well 3 months in a row, it doesn't make sense for you to have it on there. And therefore, ultimately, what gets funneled down is what you think works. Paneer works. If you're a big family and you have picky eaters and you have children who will not eat vegetables, paneer works. Paneer pasanda works. And if you go to a Shetty run, lunch home, it's a known formula that dosas work, you know, because dosas are kind of like, they are the common denominator for Gujaratis and Tamilians and Maharashtrians and the Kannadigas and everybody. But are you going to find like the huli, you know, like this really tamarind laced sambar from Karnataka? Are you going to find the hyper local dishes? Are you going to find Lingayat food in a Shetty restaurant? No, you're not. And the reason is because you need to have the market for it. It needs to make economic sense. You need to obviously have the financial heft to be able to take a culinary risk like that, and even risk the loss, you know. Like my very dear friend Kaina they run a bunch of restaurants, including Rustam's, which is a Parsi restaurant in Delhi, and they also run Bhavan, which is their new mithai and chaat brand. And, you know, like just through interaction with her, I know that every new concept takes so much time for people to accept. And like, you know, she will sometimes you know, say, yeah, people come to a Parsi restaurant and ask me for hari chutney, what am I supposed to do? And, you know, the fact is that you have to factor that in, and it's not like she can shoo them away. So she has a version of hari chutney to appeal to that audience. So you know, it also says something about our propensity as a civilization to demand what is familiar to us in the restaurant space. Like, if this is what I'm used to eating in a restaurant, I want the same thing to be available wherever I go. And I'm not going to fault that, because I think it's also just a way of, you know, you want what you want. So the complicated answer to that question is that home cooking is really indicative of what you would, or I mean, I wish it would be, but unless, like, one of the interesting things about Dubai is that you will find a lot of regional Indian cuisines here. You will not just find, like, you know, you will find Malayali, you will find Tamil, you will find Bengali, you will find Bihari, you will find all these little things, because there is that much diversity, and you know that you have a population that will sustain your operation. Whereas if you're not sure about that, it's a big risk to take. And I think that, so restaurants really, if ever, are a truthful indication of the diversity of regional Indian cuisines.
Yeah, I mean, even if you just take that simple dosa, I had never, and I grew up partly in South India, and in Bombay, I lived in a neighborhood that was largely South Indian.
Mm.
I had never had a crisp dosa in anybody's home.
True.
The way that the restaurant would serve you, and people want
True.
crisp dosa. I mean, I have to make it a point when I'm going to an Udupi right now to say, I don't want a crisp dosa. Please do not get
Yeah.
uppered. I want a dosa. Right?
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
It was not something I ate in people's homes, but to a lot of people, that crisp masala dosa is indicative of they're eating South Indian food. Even in the dosas, how many people would have heard of, say, a pesarettu?
Mm.
Or there's one variety of dosas. And in this broader topic about how food travels, what Vidya touched on there is also how food travels not just with the people, but when food travels in restaurants, in professional food, the business, it travels in a very different kind of way. You have got,
Absolutely.
there are people sitting in America with an idea of Indian food that is very limited by what they've
Extremely.
seen. And look at it another way. Look at what we know. Look at what has happened to a simple thing like a Chinese fried rice, which would be absolutely unrecognizable in different parts of India thanks to local adaptation. Or
Absolutely.
pizza. We have taken the pizza, which is a fairly simple concept.
Mm-hmm.
It is sort of related to an uttapam in some ways, prepared in a slightly different way. But yeah, it's something on which you put other stuff, and it's baked in one place, fried in another, or on a cover. But they adapt. And when you are running a food business, you have got to cater to your customers if you want
Absolutely.
to stay.
Absolutely.
I read this beautiful piece on momos in Delhi.
China's.
Yes, lovely piece. It was so insightful, where this lady who is the pioneer says that she's had to adapt because people want them spicier. They want certain sets of ingredients. She's in business. She's feeding you to feed her family to make a living. She will make the momo the way you want it.
Absolutely.
Not a genuine
Absolutely.
momo. And that entire concept of authenticity in any case is so flawed, right? Because partly in reaction to what Rana was saying, cuisines travel, they adapt, old ways die out. It's sad, but it's also movement. Your boys, Rana, will have a different view of their nostalgia is a different one from yours, right? And what they will long for 20 years from now may not be exactly the same thing as you would now long for and what you are mourning the loss of.
Yeah.
Food travels, it adapts in so many different ways. I was just looking at the concept of the Trinidad doubles. Having a
absolutely.
about that with a friend in Trinidad. That at first look is chana and puris, but it's not.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah. But,
or even, it's the same thing with bunny chow. You think it's bread and whatever, like some chicken curry, and it's not. It's so not, right?
Yeah.
One of the greatly fascinating things for me was that I had the opportunity to interview the British food writer Fuchsia Dunlop when she had come to Sri Lanka as part of the Gaul Lit Fest a few years ago. And, Fuchsia is a classically trained Chinese chef. Like, she went to culinary school in China. She speaks fluent Chinese. She's written several books on Chinese cuisine. And what I was really intrigued by, and what she was intrigued by, and what tickled me, is that we started talking about Sri Lankan Chinese food. And Sri Lankan Chinese food is like Indian Chinese, would be practically unrecognizable to somebody who's trained in classical Chinese food. Like Sri Lankan Chinese food has this amazing dish called hot butter cuttlefish, which is essentially batter fried cuttlefish thrown together with curry leaves, red chilies, and what they call Chinese chili paste, but is actually Sri Lankan chili paste. And it has this, it's beautifully textured, it's crunchy, it's chewy, it's full of umami, but it has nothing to do with China. And yet it is a quintessential part of a Sri Lankan Chinese meal. Like, if you told a Sri Lankan, let's go to eat Chinese, this is what they understand and this is what they know as Chinese. And And during the course of that conversation, I realized that every country in the subcontinent has its own version of Chinese food. There's Nepali Chinese food, there's Pakistani Chinese food, there's Indian Chinese food, there's Sri Lankan Chinese food. And who is to say that these are not authentic? They're authentic onto themselves. They're not authentic in the larger sense of, like, are they from is it Shanghainese or is it Cantonese? No, it's not. It's subcontinental, and yet they have their legions of fans. They are authentic from the experience of those who consume them and know them. And this is what makes food so fascinating, right? Not the fact that you have one standard definition of food, like all the different subcontinental Chinese foods, to me, are such a great example of how food travels. Like it came here somehow. Somebody took it, made something out of it, and now it's like a genre unto itself. You can make a meme about it, you can joke about it, but the fact that it's loved, and that to me is the great power of food, I think.
The entire deal of the Indo-Chinese restaurant in the US serves what an Indian would recognize. And
absolutely.
As I was talking to a friend about it comparatively recently, and I said, is there a difference? And she said, yes, it has evolved. It is no longer exactly the same thing that you would have got of an Indian street cart, which is what it started out as being, right?
Yeah.
And it was basis wanting Indian Chinese.
That and American Chinese is its own abomination.
Which again, yeah, American chop suey, which by the way, I confess, I adored it as a kid.
Really?
Every time we went out to eat, where I was allowed to pick, so like on my birthday or something like that, we didn't eat out much.
Of course, yeah.
But birthdays, that you would be taken by your family, and one Chinese restaurant in Chembur at that time. What do you want? I want to go to Beijing. What do you want to eat? American chop suey. I just adored it. Speaking, Rana, you're talking about Hakka as a byword for Indian Chinese. The double, and it's the Trinidad doubles, as my Trinidadian friend reminded. You can't say singular. It's not a double. It's a doubles.
Yeah, it's a doubles. Yeah.
Doubles.
Like Mangalore buns, never bun.
It has migrated to Canada and then back to the Caribbean. One of the iconic originators of the doubles migrated to Canada, started a chain of restaurants there, did some well, and then came back into Trinidad and brought the doubles back in a different kind of way. So that evolution is just
fascinating,
so interesting to watch, right?
Absolutely.
The Bombay inventions, the chicken Manchurian.
What gives?
Chicken Manchurian, right? And what was fascinating was how the chicken Manchurian developed, and you then evolved to have a vegetarian version, which is the gobi Manchurian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the entire, I remember having this conversation way back as a copywriter. I was one of a client who was a restaurant. I won't name the restaurant that was coming up, Chinese. And so I was helping to write the menus. And so I went to spend a few days with the chefs to understand what they were doing and all that. And we were chatting, and there was this little informal conversation about stock. The secrets of Chinese food is there is a stock pot bubbling all day, and all the odds and ends get dumped in there.
Yeah.
And you have a fried rice. The secret to that amazing taste of the fried rice is a scoop of stock. And then someone pointed out to the Bombay Chinese guys, who were descendants of the Cal Chinese by and large, that Baba, you are serving vegetarian people, and you're putting non-vegetarian stock. And they were like, oh, fuck, really? Okay, we can do something about it. And then they invented something called the vegetarian stock pot. So they have a separate vegetarian stock pot where all the vegetable odds and ends go in, and they use those for the vegetarian. But there are generations of vegetarian people who ate Chinese food and unknowingly had meat stock.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very well known. In fact, it was something I learned relatively later in life, that I've tried to recreate that beautiful
umami flavor of Chinese, like, you add how much of a garlic you want and you do all of that, you're not gonna get the. And I was discussing this with a friend who runs a restaurant, and she was like, oh yeah, that's a little bit of chicken stock that goes into it. It's like, what? Because I was vegetarian at the time. Um, which is like, yeah, that's very much the secret. In fact, they say in Hong Kong, the secret to having
Okay, I seem to have, I don't know whether it's my connection or yours. Everyone, has Vidya frozen for you, or is it me?
sorry, I think, did I temporarily lose you?
Yes, you did. Okay, you're back.
Just give me a moment though. I think my connection is not very good.
Yeah. Folks in the audience, is it me that's frozen or is it Vidya? If it's me, obviously won't be able to hear me.
No, it's switching.
Hey, okay, I think you're back, Vidya.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Hi, Peter. I'm back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was saying that
We're talking
I
about
lost
stock.
my chain.
We're talking
About Hong
stock.
Kong. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the secrets behind that beautiful like umami flavor in, like, even your most basic vegetable stir fry in Cantonese cuisine is the fact that they always add a chicken stock cube to it, which is why, like, if you're a strict vegetarian, then it's worthwhile checking, whether they add it. But I know for a fact that that's the secret behind that richness of flavor.
And sort of at a tangent, Sumita, your question about restaurant food and home food, again with Chinese food, and with things like in a culture where stock is part of the process, where you keep making stock and refrigerating it, having a boiling stock pot all day is something that is feasible in a restaurant, right? It is actually allowable to be able to put, because you're cooking for so many things and there's a whole lot that goes into that stock pot every day. Making stock at home has to be a process of its own. You set
Oh
aside
yeah.
a day to sit and make stock. And
I think it takes a whole week actually, because you have to collect all your scraps. You have to keep
I
it
just freeze
aside.
my scraps for months on end and then
Yeah.
take it out on one day, dump it all in the cooker.
Yeah.
That's my project for the day, right?
Yeah, it is.
Making that
And,
stock and
I tried making stock a few times, and while the process was deeply gratifying, it's also a lot of work.
yeah,
Stock is the simplest
just
thing
get
and yet the hardest thing.
it's so much simpler to just get stock cubes, no?
Yeah.
But
Like we get very good stock here in the supermarket, so that's my, like, I feel a little bit guilty while buying it, because I know that this is something I can make at home, but yet it's also convenience.
yeah. Uh, we are at a little over the 2 hour mark. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm also mindful, Vidya, that you're still, not 100% well, but I am happy to continue talking as long as you are. But let me
I'm
know.
happy to talk. Yeah, I'm happy to talk for a while longer.
All right.
If anybody has questions or anything that they'd like to ask me, I'm happy to answer as well.
Yeah. But I'm also just again putting in Vidya's public presence there. You can contact her via Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah. And I also put my official email address there just for anybody who'd like to write to me about anything to do with writing or Whetstone.
Yeah. By and large, I don't share email addresses either way. I will not reveal
Mm.
audience email addresses to anybody. I don't give those out, and I don't reveal guest IDs either. Uh,
Mm.
these are public presences, and I share those. Right?
Yeah. That's fine.
That's fine. Uh, the Neither you will have. I will be putting out a mail to everyone, which shares all the stuff that we've talked about, any links that we've talked about today, books, reading, etc. Whatever Vidya would be happy to share later, I will be sharing it with everyone. But yeah, I'll. There is something more in the Q&A. Oh no, I forgot to mark that
No.
as done. Folks, if you do have more questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll continue to chat for a bit. But continuing on that, who are, and this is connected with what I was just saying about links that we could share later. Who were the food writers, the writers who influenced your journey as a writer? Who did you learn from? Who would name some books and maybe periodicals or specific writers, that kind of thing, if you could?
This is a good question because I think that I have the truthful answer to this question is that I have learned food writing through feel and repetition and discipline, and by applying the broad ideas of good writing to food writing. So in that sense, I think, I have been less influenced by reading other people than kind of, doing the work. But having said, one of the very first places that I actually freelanced for when I moved to Sri Lanka was this wonderful website called Roads and Kingdoms. It's run by Nathan Thornburg, who used to be with Time. I wrote some of my best pieces for them, and much later they became Anthony Bourdain invested in them, and through my work and through all the things that I wrote, I actually met him. I met Bourdain. I was a consultant on Parts Unknown when in its last season when they came to Sri Lanka. I have to say that I was never a Bourdain fan. Like I have dear friends who have followed his work from his no reservations kind of days, but I wasn't one of them. I was like, I wasn't really a great fan, but then I happened to have the opportunity to help out on this show, and that really influenced. I mean, it was a great thrill, of course, because I think that just being able to understand food in through the lens of a TV show that was, connecting the connecting audiences around the world to cultures that they knew nothing about. Um, and seeing how the process worked backstage was really a thrill. It was a great high. And as part of my work for Parts Unknown, I actually had the opportunity. I asked for the opportunity to interview Bourdain, which I got to do, and I was really. It was a great interview, but I was also really struck by how I think that he had a great deal of self-awareness about the fact that he was a privileged person who was being paid to travel the world to tell the stories of people on their behalf, and he knew that this was something that was problematic in some ways, and he had accepted that. And it was a very thought-provoking conversation. I've written about it, but it really very belatedly, even though I had already been on my journey of food writing for a long time, it gave me, truthfully, like it gave me something to look forward to. It was a deep thrill. It was a great learning experience. I had actually looked forward to working on, as in a more hands-on role on the show, and then unfortunately, uh, things happened.
Yes.
So Bourdain, I think, came and was an inspiration to me much later. But again, inspirations don't have to always be formative. They can always happen to you when you're already on your journey, and then you learn so much through them. But among other writers, I really love Diana Bujaber. I think she writes beautifully. She is part Jordanian, part American. She actually grew up in America, but her dad is from, both parents are from Jordan. And she writes beautifully about this peculiar experience of growing up between cultures and being kind of having to understand your identity when you're neither from here nor from there. And even though I'm 100% Indian, I feel some of that because I have moved around so much in my life
Exactly.
that I relate to this sense of not really being from anywhere, and kind of being a slightly detached global citizen in that sense.
Mhm.
So her work really speaks to me. There are the greats, of course. There are so many others that I could the Lucky Peaches of the world, of course, had a, Lucky Peach was again one of those magazines, the David Chang and Peter Meehan food magazine that was irreverent, that was wicked, that looked at food in this completely funny, almost distasteful sometimes way. But also, I think it removed food from the pedestal that it was often placed on and made it something profane, made it something humorous, made it something that you could poke fun at. And that was also a very different way of thinking about food, and for somebody who was actually coming of age as a food writer during the time that Lucky Peach was at its peak, it was definitely one of those influences. I also I'm currently reading, I mentioned this to you. I have had this book for a few years, but I'm reading it again now. It's called Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking. It's a beautiful memoir by Anya von Bremzen. She's won a James Beard Award. And she left the USSR as a little girl. She and her mom fled to America. And the memoir traces her journey with Soviet food from the time from the heydays of the country all the way to its eventual collapse. And she's also a very, very gifted writer. So, I mean, I guess I'm drawn to the kind of food writing that is also reflective of my experiences. And that is also like I'm drawn to this style that investigates the sense of belonging, identity, and what that means in the context of food, because that's something that is a deep preoccupation of mine as well.
Yeah, I get you. I was just thinking about, I think that a lot of me looks for things that are, to just choose one word to say it, that are fusions. I moved around, I come from mixed ancestry. I've been a minority practically everywhere I am. And there's really no place in the world where I would feel 100% at home and unremarkable, right? Just because of who I am.
Absolutely.
Yeah. My grandfather recognized that he had the opportunity, being an army man, of having, could have gone to the UK if he wanted, having served in the British Army and being semi-British. But he was like, this is my home. My dad also felt the same way, right? And so my family didn't move that. And really, yeah, India is the most time at home. But there is no other place where even in India and so many places, I am not at home.
Absolutely.
I am an oddity.
Gosh, I feel you. I mean, I rarely feel at home in India. I mean, there are many painful reasons for this. One is that I'm dark skinned, I have curly hair. I'm often mistaken for an exotic foreigner in Chennai. I'm mistaken for an exotic foreigner in Bombay. Very many people are very surprised when I speak Hindi or Tamil, for that matter. And all of that is also a painful reminder in some ways of the fact that belonging can also be elusive in the Indian context. It can also be a narrowly defined category. And in fact, I had a really interesting interaction recently. I went to a small place called the African Shop here, which stocks ingredients from West Africa. It's in the heart of like the old city in Dera. And the old lady who ran it, she was like, "Oh, are you from India?" I was like, "Yeah." And she said, "I didn't realize that people in India can have skin and hair like me." And I was like, "Yeah, well, it is possible. It is." So I guess this sense of not belonging anywhere is also is deeply coded into my experiences, and it also informs the way I think, and I think that I'm naturally therefore drawn to the gray areas, like the in betweens. Like I'm always drawn to not the neat sense of belonging to any one culture community, but the fact that so many of us are on the margins.
I hear you.
So I think there are a couple of questions here, no?
And I mean, I was trying to put my finger on this the India experiment, if you would like to call it that, of the secular India. India is actually such a I mean, it's cliche. We are a diverse country, right?
Mm,
You just take the superficial color of skin,
absolutely.
kind of hair.
Yeah.
I think we have the gamut in this country.
Mm,
We have the light skin,
light eyes.
Asian, light eyes, not so much light hair. I mean, you're not going to find that many
Yeah.
people who are natural blondes in India,
Yeah,
but
yeah, of
you have
course.
an enormous spectrum
Mm,
from, East Asian kind of looks, because that has been the racial mix in that part of the
yeah.
country. The darker skins, the in between, the browns, the olives, the hair types. We are such a naturally diverse and country that we would seem to be, if things went well, an example to the rest of the world how people can coexist. But unfortunately, it
Absolutely.
seems to be going off into a different direction at this point, and which is sad, which is very saddening. But yes, Sumita's question about, do you, when you ideate a piece, do you know beforehand where it will be published? That is a question to you there. And a further question, is it important to have a space in mind? On the second question, Sumita, yeah, you should have a space in mind. Like, where are you pitching? There is no greater compliment to an editor when someone has actually researched that magazine, researched that publication, and knows has a feel for what they do. Because I mean,
True.
I've had people pitching me when I was in other places with zero idea of what we do, who don't seem to have even read what we had done before, and we're pitching stuff that's
Mm,
just, and that's a waste of my time. And I mean, it's no point pitching a 5,000 word deep meditative piece to a publication that takes 500 word reviews, for instance.
yeah, true.
But yeah, personally to you, uh, in the time that you worked freelance, etc., did you know beforehand? Were you? I think what Sumita's also asking is that combination of commissioned pieces. Someone asks you to write something specifically, but when you're pitching, do you know where you're going to pitch?
I think broadly, I want to qualify this by saying that having been on both sides of the fence, I also know that it's very difficult sometimes to place pieces. It's not as simple as saying, I want to write for this place and immediately getting accepted there. I have struggled. I have struggled to find homes for pieces, and that's definitely not one of my strengths. Like, I think one of the things about freelance writing, which if you want to do long term, is that you have to relentlessly believe in your idea and keep pitching it until it finds a home. That's not something that I have been able to do. Like, in the sense that I just, it's difficult for me to. I've accepted that as probably one of the shortcomings in like, but broadly speaking, yes, it would really help to have some idea of where you want to place this piece, because it just narrows the field, and it makes, I think it also gives your pitch a lot of direction. If you know, for instance, if you've read I'm just giving you the example of Whetstone. If you've read Whetstone in the past, um, and you know what the kind of work we publish, it makes it easier for you to write a pitch that would work for us. So yeah, I mean, it definitely helps to have some vague sense of, like, at least a rough idea of where you would like to pitch your story. But that's not always possible. So in that case, I think you should stay open to the idea that you can slightly rework your pitch to make it work for different publications. Like, if one person doesn't have the space for it, don't give up on it, tweak it, but also know the ethos of the publication that you're writing to before you write to them, because that's always a plus.
Mhm. Yeah. And putting down another little thing there, if you know a lot about a subject and you'd like to write about it, uh, people who work in the travel space and all that are very good at doing this. All right. You have the little junkets that you go off to some place or the other, and you can take that one set of experiences and look at it in multiple different ways.
Absolutely.
You know that, hey, a Whetstone is going to be happy to look at a deeply contemplative piece that is not just about the food. Uh,
Yeah.
you do one, so you tailor one part of that and you think about it in that way for Whetstone. Uh, a Saturday supplement for a
Yeah.
newspaper, which will take 500 words at most.
Absolutely.
You think about what you can say in 500 words about that same subject, right?
Mm.
And you can tailor what you pitch. I mean, you can tailor an experience or one set of knowledge that you have, whether it's recently acquired as in a trip, or it's something that you deeply know because it is your lived experience. You can take any of these things and look at it through different lenses for different publications. And for that, you have to, of course, research the publication and figure out what they do. And rather than,
Mm.
scattershot pitch the same thing to hundreds of different people and try to
Yeah,
figure out what they do,
absolutely.
just be wasting time, and you're wasting the
Yeah,
time of people.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
remember every single writer who has made a thoughtful pitch to me. I,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I may not have been able to use
Absolutely.
the pitch. Yeah.
Yeah, but you remember the writer for
Time,
sure.
and the next time something comes up, I have gone and sought that writer out and said, hey, listen, you pitch this. I couldn't use this. Could you look at this?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Sumita has another question, which is rather wide. Uh, in what way can we use food to create peace, harmony, tolerance, mutual respect, and understanding? Sumita, if any of us has an answer to this, we are up for the Nobel. But I do want to hear, I do want to hear what Vidya thinks about this. I mean, this is something that we have kind of touched on in various ways in the course of this conversation, I think, about harmony and understanding and being open. But specifically to answer that question, how could food create a better world?
I think I think curiosity is always the way. I think just simple curiosity, like what might that taste like? What might that be like? What would that experience entail? What would I feel when I ate it? For me, that has always been the driving force. And I feel like curiosity has always lit the path for me. It has naturally made me much more tolerant and understanding of cultures, because I may not, like, I remember this night from many years ago when we were in Bangkok, and we had actually it was many years ago, we had a crazy drunken night out, and at the end of the night, there was a street cart that was selling fried bugs, including creepy crawlies and like stuff. And I simply could not, like, it was just out of the realm of the things that I would try. It was just not happening. My husband happily tried it. I was like, no, not for me. Um, and a few years later, I went to Cambodia and by the time, I think that I had also thought about food, and I had thought about, eating insects. I thought about like these things in a very different way. I'd had the opportunity to write about it. I had the opportunity to talk to people about it, and something had shifted in my head. I'm using this as a very, very broad example, because I understand that there are so many things that people don't want to try, and you have very good reason not to try it. But I'm using my personal example to illustrate the fact that by the time I went to Cambodia, I was okay with trying, like, maybe ants. And I know for a fact that there are so many communities in India who eat it, right? Like Chhattisgarh, and like in the Northeast. And the fact that, if you ate it, if you're willing to go the distance and try it, I'm not saying this is for everybody, I'm just saying personally, it allowed me to be much more understanding of other communities in my own context. Tomorrow if I went to Chhattisgarh, it's very likely that if I had the opportunity, I would try the ant chutney. Why not? And I think that is the fundamental basis for what we call mutual respect and understanding. To not look at somebody else's food and think, oh my God, gross. To say, oh, like, why would you eat that? Like, kaun khata hai? Like, who eats this stuff? Like, and that is the foundation, that's the basis. And I think that for me and the kind of work that we want to do at Whetstone, being able to write about it, we recently ran this really, really thought-provoking piece on the fact that somewhere during the lockdown last year, the peak of the migrant crisis and all that, like, the government thought it was their civilizing mission to ban dog meat in Nagaland. And the writer, kind of made this argument that even if there are not a lot of people who eat dog meat. Like, there are very few people in Nagaland who actually practice this, because even for them, it's a kind of conflict of values for a lot of people. These are beloved animals, etc., etc. And yet the fact that, as an overarching idea, you think that it is a civilizing mission to go and ban it because those people should be prevented from eating that thing. What you're essentially trying to say is that you are either like us or you're not like us, and that is disrespect. And that was a piece that the point is making, that like, by outlawing something on the basis of one person or a group's morality, you are causing disrespect to other communities without understanding them. And I point to make when it comes to food, when it comes to food writing, you may not appreciate it, you may not enjoy it, but you have to accept it and you cannot insult it.
Absolutely. It's that two words there, curiosity, respect, right?
Yeah.
Coming from a position of respect. I'm just going to read you something that a friend of mine had put on. It's just one tweet long. And
Sure.
she's a chef and has a couple of Michelin stars and whatnot.
Mm.
And she said in Thai, when we eat something that's not to our taste, we don't really say, I don't like this or this is bad. We say, I don't know how to eat this.
What a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
What a profound idea.
Yeah. Pim is going to be my guest on a coming table.
Oh, nice. I follow her on various things.
Yeah. I mean, Pim and I, actually, we know each other back from the Tsunami blog. She was one of the people who worked together with us. And she had started something at that point in time, which was an annual charity run where a number of restaurateurs would get together and offer their food in exchange for donations to their causes, right? So Pim and
I think that's one of the beautiful things about what Bourdain did. Never refusing what somebody gave you, even if it's an affront to everything, even if it's an affront to your sense of taste, even if it repulses you, even if it tastes vile. Not saying, oh my God, no, to something that somebody offers you. I mean, this is a lofty ideal. Not all of us can do it. We have, food is arguably a sensitive thing, and people have aversions, and I fully respect and understand that. But like you said, I don't know how to eat this is so much of a humbler approach than saying, oh my God, how can you eat this?
Absolutely. I mean, the contempt that comes into, oh God, they're eating insects. Do you know where they come from?
Exactly.
Eating insects in the future is going to be hugely important.
Exactly.
It's going to be a really big deal. But look at where these are people who did not have access to the grain that you did, to the meat that you did. This was the way that they survived. And by saying, you are.
And I think their evolutionary intelligence is greater than ours, because they had tapped into a source that we will have to resort to in the future, because we'll run out of everything else. So their evolutionary intelligence is something that we have to look up to, rather than kind of,
you don't even
look down upon.
You don't even have to look at it through that lens. You don't have to say that, hey, they're ahead of. This is their life. This is their circumstance.
Exactly.
Respect that, right? In a certain place, they ate a certain thing which you are not used to. People will look at someone growing up on European cuisine, or French cuisine, which is the stocks and the herbs, would be overwhelmed by the level of spice in some Indian food, right?
Absolutely.
Would they look down on it because of that? Some might, but it's not the only way to look at it. The openness, the curiosity that we talked about, and that respect is important. This is their reality. This is the way it is. If you lived in a certain way, and it boils down to so many things. That boils down was an accidental pun, but the understanding of, for instance, the importance of eating local. One, it's adapted to where you are. It is evolved in that place to be a great thing. It has the remarkable thing of, in hindsight, it is foresight. to look at that.
Yeah.
To say, hey, look at the air miles that came out of that. Look at what it takes to bring this to you. We
Absolutely.
had this available here. Millets were available. Avocados, no one knew that avocados were growing in Bangalore till it became yuppie food, hipster food, right? And suddenly,
Yeah, absolutely.
almonds which are growing in California only and which are so water intensive in a state that is hit with drought.
Absolutely.
All of these
And
things.
yet, this is what informs like an edified food conversation. Like that seems suspect to me, like, your food conversation should ideally encompass or at least accommodate the ground lived realities of communities. It shouldn't be based on the exclusivist whims and privileges of a few. And that's why I think it's so important. What would the highest response be? Yeah,
That's an interesting question. And
yeah, that's a really interesting
I'm
question.
going to read the question out for the recording. To take the same
Yeah.
idea forward, if someone is disrespectful towards us in the sense of the food that we eat, if someone is disrespectful to the food we eat, what would the highest response be?
I wish I could say it would be patience. I want to say it would be patience. It would be, the problem with the modern days that disrespect is so closely tied into a kind of violence.
Yeah.
And that for me is very, very difficult to contend with.
Mm.
The violence of being judged for what you eat, and the violence implicit in the language used to describe food that is not of our taste. I think that for me is a very difficult reality to wrap my head around. It really bothers me.
Let me take a stab at part of that answer and come at it from a tangent.
Mm.
Take the time, if you can, to figure out where that disrespect is coming from. Is it ignorance or is it hate?
Mm.
In politics, there is the concept of the swing. There are some
Mm.
people who will vote for X no matter what. There are
Yeah.
some people who will not vote for X no matter what. I mean,
Mm.
X can feed the multitudes with, two loaves of fish and fish, and they will still hate him.
Yeah.
X could murder someone in the street, and there are a set of people who will still love him.
Absolutely.
Politicians know that you target the swing, right?
Yeah.
You go for the swing because those are the people who could go either way.
Mm.
If they're coming from a position of absolute hate, there's not much you can do.
Yeah. True.
There's a concept that I've only learned about in the last 10 years, thanks to young friends of mine, of emotional labor.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
You owe them are you capable at that point of putting in the
Do you
emotional
want
labor?
to? Yeah.
You want to, is it worth it?
Yeah.
Are
Absolutely.
you going to convert that person? Does that person matter to you enough for you to want to convert them?
Yeah.
Some random troll on Twitter,
Yeah.
you don't owe them anything. If it's
Yeah.
a dear
Absolutely.
friend who you think who has
Worthy of that time and effort.
who has acted disrespectfully, but it may not come from a position of disrespect.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that is a time when I would take the time to explain.
Yeah. True.
If someone's going to go ew and yuck, you're not going to have much of a job convincing them at that stage, because they're coming at it from a position of repulsion.
Mm.
Okay. Another time, if they matter to you, you might be able to give them context. Let it go for now.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, I think that's as close to an answer as one can get to that particular question. I haven't had experiences with people having expressed a violent dislike for anything related to food with me, but I've had these conversations about religion with people, and And I had it, I remember a few years ago with complete strangers. And I did exert a lot of emotional labor into trying to not convert so much as just angrily assert what I believed about secularism and the importance of it. And a few years later, when I think back to that night and I think back to these complete strangers whom I met for the first and last time, when I think about whether I, as an older person, have the energy to perform that kind of labor again, there's really exhausting, kind of self-defeating kind of labor. I don't think I have the energy for it anymore, like it's so tragic, like honestly, because I think that it's worth fighting for, and yet you have to draw the line for how much you're willing to do to fight, and how much it's going to take from you and what effect it's going to ultimately have. And that's a very, very personal calculus that you need to make.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're getting the labor is being treated as labor. For instance, if you're getting paid to write a good explainer,
Yeah.
in the same way as how much are you getting paid would work in other circumstances, think of this in that way. What is the reward to uh, to making that conversion, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? And sometimes it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it to get into random arguments.
Yeah, I agree.
Twitter, for instance, who are there just to provoke and to waste your time.
Yeah, and you get drawn into it.
I would take the time with a friend. I would take time with someone who is coming at it from a position of lack of knowledge. Right? Who has just not encountered it. Yeah. So the I think we've come. I was trying to find the words to it. I think we've done a pretty good job of looking at how you would look at that in most circumstances. And really, it's not just about food, right? It's where the attitude that they're coming from.
Absolutely.
Maybe they just didn't know how to eat that, but they don't have the words to say, right? So you tell them how you eat it. You tell them why you eat it, where it comes from.
That's a beautiful, beautiful analogy and a beautiful primer for how to talk to people who think differently and eat differently from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not surprisingly, that tweet went so massively viral.
Absolutely.
117,000 likes I'm seeing now.
Wow.
26,000 odd retweets. And Pim is not exactly an unknown person in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was viral for her. Yeah, Pim has Michelin star restaurants on 2 continents, and amazing person. But Pim will be a guest sometime maybe in December or January, depending on when we can figure it out. But Vidya, we're at close to 3 hours. But if the audience has thinned out a bit, people have to go and do other stuff. And I think this might be a good note to look to end this conversation. I have, as I promised, I will share whatever Vidya would like to share in terms of links and further reading and writers to follow and things like that with everyone who's attended. But for now, thank you everyone, and especially thank you to everyone who stayed right through to the end.
Yeah, right through. Thank you. I know a few people in that audience. Thank you.
Yes, there are 2 Mehaks who perhaps would be coming.
Yeah, but there's only one Mehak, and she's from Dubai.
All right. Maybe it's a family member who Mehak has given the link to, who has come into that. But yes, Mehak, Neeta, Sumita, Vanita, Vishnu, thank you for staying through right till the very end. We hope, come back next week, the next fortnight. Kishi Arora is coming on. And
lovely.
We're going to talk about pastry and being a pastry chef and all of that kind
of.
Oh,
lovely. I look forward to that.
And then Manu Chandra is going to come on and we're going to talk about restaurants. And
wow, what fun.
that goes in. But for now, thank you everyone for attending. And Vidya, thank you for being so generous with your time, your insights, your
No,
knowledge.
my pleasure entirely. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. See you everyone.
Bye. See you,
Bye.
everybody.